My name is Carrie, and I'm 58 years old. 5 years ago, my husband James died and left me with $45 million. Yet I chose to keep this a secret from our 3 children. I wanted to see if they truly cared about me or just what I could give them. As they grew closer to their new stepfather, Stephen, and treated me like a burden, I watched and waited. When their financial world finally crumbled, I had to make the hardest decision a mother could face. If you're curious about where this story leads, stick around. Let me know where you're watching from, subscribe for more family revelations, and prepare yourself for what happened at that bankruptcy hearing. I wasn't always wealthy. I started my adult life as a librarian in a small town in upstate New York. I loved being surrounded by books, helping people find information, and creating a peaceful space for the community. That's where I met James. He came in looking for books on computer programming. He was handsome, intelligent, and had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. We started talking about books, then technology, then everything else. 3 months later, we were dating seriously, and a year after that, we were married. James was a software engineer with big dreams. He worked for a small tech company at first, but he had an incredible knack for spotting technological trends before they became mainstream. He started investing in tech startups in the early 90s, and many of those investments paid off tremendously. Despite his growing wealth, James was never flashy about money. He drove the same reliable car for years. We lived in a comfortable but modest home, and we taught our children that character matters more than possessions. Our family grew quickly. Thomas was born first, a serious and thoughtful boy who inherited his father's analytical mind. 2 years later came Amanda, creative and social, always organizing neighborhood events even as a child. Ryan, our youngest, arrived 3 years after Amanda. He was adventurous and charming, the kind of child who could talk his way into or out of anything. We raised our children with love and stability. James was an involved father who coached soccer teams, helped with science, fair projects, and had weekly one-on-one outings with each child. I volunteered at their schools, hosted their friends for sleepovers, and created a home where everyone felt safe and valued. We were happy. Not perfect, what family is, but genuinely happy. As the children grew into teenagers, James's investments continued to flourish. By the time Thomas headed to college, we were millionaires several times over, yet we maintained our modest lifestyle. The children knew we were comfortable financially. We paid for their college educations without loans and took nice family vacations. But they had no idea of the true extent of their father's wealth. James believed this was important for their development. "I don't want them growing up entitled," he told me one night as we sat in our garden. "I want them to build their own lives, find their own paths. If they know about all the money, it might stop them from becoming who they're meant to be." I agreed with him then. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices. James died suddenly of a heart attack when he was just 55. It was a normal Tuesday morning. He kissed me goodbye before heading out for his daily run, promised to pick up groceries on his way home, and then he was gone. A neighbor found him collapsed on the jogging path in the park. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The children were devastated. Thomas was 32 by then, already trying to launch his first tech startup. Amanda was 30 and married to Peter with their first child on the way. Ryan was 27, still finding himself, through a series of jobs in the hospitality industry. They all came home for the funeral and stayed for several weeks afterward, helping me sort through James's things and adjust to life without him. It was during the reading of the will that I received the shock of my life. James had accumulated far more wealth than even I had realized. $45 million in various investments, properties, and accounts. And he had left it all to me with a letter explaining his decision. "Carrie," he wrote, "I know this might surprise you. I've built this wealth through our partnership with your support and love making everything possible. I'm leaving everything to you because I trust your judgment completely. You'll know when and how to share this with our children. You'll know what's best for them. I love you, and I trust you to carry forward our values." Our financial advisor, Harold Winters, suggested I tell the children immediately. "They're adults," he said. "They should know about their inheritance." But something held me back. In the weeks after James's death, I'd noticed subtle changes in my children. Thomas had started talking constantly about his business ideas, hinting that a significant investment from me would make all the difference. Amanda and Peter suddenly needed a larger house before their baby arrived. Ryan had asked quite directly what kind of payout he could expect. These weren't the values James and I had tried to instill, so I made a decision. I would keep the full extent of the inheritance secret for now. I told the children that their father had left enough for me to live comfortably, but modestly. I would continue living in our family home, which was fully paid for, and I had a reasonable retirement fund. I could help them occasionally with small amounts, but nothing extravagant. The children seemed disappointed, but accepted what I told them. They returned to their lives, and I began adjusting to widowhood. About 6 months after James's death, I reconnected with Stephen Miller. Stephen wasn't actually James's brother-in-law, as I sometimes mistakenly introduced him. He was the best friend of James's brother Michael. He had been at our wedding and various family events over the years. Stephen reached out to offer condolences and check on me. He was recently divorced and understood the loneliness of suddenly being single again. Stephen was attentive and kind at first. He took me to dinner, accompanied me to social events, where I would have felt awkward alone, and seemed genuinely interested in helping me rebuild my life. When the children visited, he made efforts to connect with them, asking about their lives and careers, with what seemed like sincere interest. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed. Stephen always managed to steer conversations toward financial topics. He would casually mention investment opportunities or ask subtle questions about James's estate. He complained about his alimony payments and the financial strain of his divorce. But in my loneliness, I overlooked these red flags. 2 years after James's death, Stephen proposed. The children encouraged the marriage, saying they were happy I had found companionship. So I said yes, believing I was starting a new chapter. After our small wedding, Stephen moved into my home. That's when things began to change more noticeably. He suggested renovations that erased James's presence. His homey office became Stephen's man cave. The garden I had maintained with James was largely replaced with a putting green. Family photos were rearranged to be less prominent. The children visited less frequently, but when they did, Stephen would dominate conversations, positioning himself as a financial authority. He would make comments like, "Your mom is lucky to have me helping with her finances now," or "I'm trying to make sure your mom doesn't outlive her limited resources." Gradually, a new family dynamic emerged. The children began to see me through Stephen's characterization, as financially naive and potentially burdensome. And they increasingly looked to him as a source of financial wisdom and potential support. I watched all of this unfold, saying little, observing much, and maintaining my secret. Part of me hoped my children would see through Stephen's facade without my intervention. Part of me still needed to know if they truly cared about me as their mother, regardless of what I could give them. I kept detailed records of my actual finances with Harold, my true financial advisor, whom Stephen knew nothing about. And I waited to see what my children would reveal about themselves when they thought I had nothing to give. As months passed after my marriage to Stephen, I noticed my relationships with my children deteriorating in subtle ways. Thomas, once so eager to share his technological ideas with his father, now barely explained his business ventures to me. When I asked questions, he would exchange knowing looks with Stephen and simplify his explanations as if I couldn't possibly understand. "Mom, it's pretty complex," he would say. "Basically, it's an app that does things for people." Stephen would nod approvingly at this non-explanation, while I, who had been married to a tech pioneer for decades and had absorbed far more than they realized, would be left feeling invisible. Thomas's startup ideas grew increasingly erratic. His first attempt had been a food delivery service specifically for office workers. Not a bad concept, but poorly executed and underfunded. When it failed, he immediately pivoted to an app for dog walkers, then to a cryptocurrency trading platform. Each new idea launched before the previous failure had been fully processed. After each failure, Thomas would visit ostensibly to check on me, but inevitably leading to financial requests. "Mom, I just need $20,000 to get this off the ground," he said after his second startup collapsed. "It's practically guaranteed to succeed. Stephen understands. He says sometimes you have to spend money to make money." "I don't have that kind of money available, Thomas," I replied truthfully, as I had moved most of the $45 million into accounts and investments that Stephen and the children knew nothing about. I maintained a modest checking account and retirement fund that aligned with my cover story. Thomas's face hardened. "You know Dad would have believed in me." That hurt more than he could know. James had believed in our children's potential, but he had also taught them about hard work, careful planning, and learning from failure. He would have asked to see a business plan, offered constructive feedback, maybe suggested starting smaller. He wouldn't have simply handed over cash. Amanda's situation evolved differently, but just as troublingly. After her first child, Sophie, was born, she and Peter quickly had a second, Jackson. They bought a house in an affluent suburb that seemed well beyond what they could afford on Peter's middle management salary and Amanda's part-time event planning work. Amanda's Instagram feed showed elaborate children's birthday parties, expensive family vacations, and home renovations that made me wonder about their finances. When they visited, both children were dressed in designer clothes, and Amanda and Peter carried the latest electronic devices. Yet despite this apparent affluence, Amanda increasingly hinted at financial strain. "Mom, would you mind watching the kids next weekend? Our regular sitter charges $30 an hour now, and with everything so expensive these days." I always said yes to spending time with my grandchildren. I treasured those hours of reading stories, baking cookies, and building blanket forts. But I noticed that Amanda treated these babysitting sessions not as cherished family time, but as a service I provided. She would return later than promised, offer minimal thanks, and sometimes criticize my caregiving methods. "Mom, I specifically said no sugar, but I can see you gave them cookies," she complained once, despite having made no such request. Another time, after I had spent the entire day entertaining the children, Amanda returned and immediately announced, "We're going to stay for dinner. Okay, Peter and I haven't had a moment to grocery shop." I prepared a meal while she sat scrolling through her phone, not offering to help. As we ate, she and Peter discussed their upcoming vacation to Bali, seemingly oblivious to the disconnect between pleading poverty for childcare while planning exotic trips. Ryan's visits became increasingly rare and brief. He had moved to Las Vegas supposedly for a job in hotel management, but his employment situation seemed perpetually uncertain. He would call occasionally, conversations brief, until he needed something. "Hey, Mom, hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a jam this month. Any chance you could help me out with rent? Just until my next paycheck." These requests came almost monthly, always with a different excuse, always just until, something that never seemed to materialize. I sent small amounts, knowing they likely weren't going toward rent, but unable to turn away from my child in need. I didn't know then that Ryan had developed a gambling problem. The signs were there: the constant money shortages despite a supposedly good job, the vague explanations, the increasing desperation in his voice. But I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge what was happening. Stephen observed all these interactions with a calculating eye. With Thomas, He positioned himself as a business mentor, offering vague encouragement without actual investment. With Amanda, he played the generous stepfather, bringing expensive gifts for the children and offering financial advice to Peter. With Ryan, he was the understanding confidant, sometimes slipping him cash when he thought I wasn't looking. All the while, Stephen's comments about my financial naivety became more frequent and pointed. Carrie never had a head for money. He would tell the children during family dinners at our home. Your father handled all that. She's lucky I came along when I did. I would sit silently watching my children nod in agreement, wondering how they could so easily dismiss my intelligence and agency. I had managed our household for decades, volunteered as treasurer for multiple community organizations, and helped James evaluate his investments more often than they knew. As these dynamics solidified, family gatherings became increasingly painful. I maintained my modest lifestyle, driving my 8-year-old car and shopping carefully, while Stephen indulged in luxury. He bought an expensive sports car, wore designer clothes, and frequently mentioned his golf outings at exclusive clubs. The children seemed to respect this display of wealth, while viewing my frugality as confirmation of my financial incompetence. The house that had once been filled with laughter and genuine connection now felt like a stage where everyone played roles. Stephen, the financial savior, my children, the ambitious young adults held back by their burden of a mother, and me, the supposedly naive widow. The breaking point came during a family dinner when Thomas was lamenting the failure of his third startup attempt. If I had proper funding from the beginning, it would have succeeded, he insisted. Some people just don't understand investing in the future. He looked pointedly at me. Maybe your mom is just being practical, Thomas, Peter offered, attempting diplomacy. Not everyone has money to risk. She's not being practical, she's being cheap, Thomas snapped. Dad left her provided for, and she hoards it all while living in this big house alone. I wasn't alone. Stephen lived there too, but that detail seemed irrelevant to Thomas in his frustration. Thomas, I said quietly, I've explained my financial situation to you. I simply don't have the kind of money you're asking for. Stephen put his arm around me in a gesture that appeared supportive but felt possessive. Your mother means well, Thomas, but she doesn't really understand business opportunities. If I had control of more of the household finances, maybe we could help you out. The conversation moved on, but something had broken inside me. My own son had called me cheap for not funding his poorly planned business ventures. My husband had suggested he should control more of my finances, and not one person at the table had defended me. That night, alone in my garden, the small section I had managed to preserve from Stephen's renovations, where I still grew James's favorite roses, I finally allowed myself to cry. I sat on the stone bench James had installed for our 20th anniversary and wondered if I had made a terrible mistake in keeping my financial situation secret. Perhaps, if my children knew the truth, they would act differently. But would they? Would knowing about the money change their fundamental character, their true feelings toward me, or would it simply mask their real attitudes with a veneer of attentiveness, motivated by potential gain? I still didn't know the answer, but I was beginning to fear what the truth might reveal about the family I thought I knew. The day of my 58th birthday dawned bright and clear. I woke early, as I always did, and spent some quiet time in my garden before Stephen stirred. The roses were particularly beautiful that year, and as I tended to them, I thought about James and how he would have celebrated this day with me. He always made birthdays special, not with extravagant gifts, but with thoughtful gestures that showed how well he knew and loved me. Stephen had mentioned a family dinner to celebrate, and I allowed myself a small hope that perhaps this would be a turning point. Perhaps my children would show me that they still cared, that there was still a foundation of love beneath the increasingly strained relationships. I spent the morning baking my own birthday cake, a tradition I had maintained even after James's death. It was a simple lemon cake with buttercream frosting, Nothing fancy, but made with care and memories of happier celebrations. Amanda arrived first with Peter and the children. Sophie, now 5, ran to hug me while Peter carried 3-year-old Jackson, who was half asleep from the car ride. "Happy birthday, Mom," Amanda said, handing me a small gift bag. Inside was a scented candle from a discount store, still with the price tag partially visible. "It's lavender, good for relaxation." "Thank you, dear," I said, genuinely appreciative of any gesture. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "No time," Amanda replied, already looking at her phone. "We need to set up the decorations Stephen ordered." I watched as Amanda and Peter transformed my dining room with elaborate decorations. An expensive banner, dozens of balloons and table settings that I had never seen before. Stephen must have purchased all of it without mentioning it to me. Thomas arrived next, giving me a quick side hug and handing me a card. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I couldn't get something bigger. Trying to conserve funds while I launch the new business." The card contained a $20 gift card to a coffee shop I rarely visited. Thomas immediately joined Amanda in discussing Stephen's decoration choices, admiring his attention to detail. Ryan called to say he couldn't make it, something about a work emergency, but promised to call again later. He never did. When Stephen finally appeared, having spent the morning at his golf club, the children greeted him with enthusiasm I hadn't received. He accepted their attention as his due, positioning himself at the head of the table, James's old spot. "Now," Stephen announced, "let's make Carrie's birthday special." Dinner proceeded with conversations that largely excluded me. The children and Stephen discussed investments, property values, and upcoming luxury purchases as if I weren't there. When I attempted to join the conversation, sharing news about my volunteer work at the library, Thomas checked his watch. Amanda suddenly needed to attend to Sophie, and Stephen patted my hand indulgently. "That's nice, dear," he said before turning back to Thomas. "Now about that commercial property I mentioned." After dinner came the gifts. Stephen had positioned a large box prominently among the presents, making my children's small offerings look even more meager by comparison. "Open mine last," Stephen instructed with a wink to the children, who nodded knowingly. Thomas's gift card was followed by Amanda and Peter's candle. There was a video message from Ryan showing him in what looked like a casino, not a workplace, half-heartedly wishing me happy birthday. Then came Stephen's gift, an expensive designer handbag that wasn't at all my style. It was ostentatious, impractical, and clearly meant to showcase his generosity rather than please me. "Wow! Stephen, that must have cost a fortune," Amanda exclaimed, examining the bag with reverence. "Mom doesn't usually carry designer things," Thomas added, as if I weren't sitting right there. "But maybe it's time she updated her image." "Only the best for my wife," Stephen declared, leaning over to kiss my cheek for a photo Amanda was taking. "Someone has to spoil her." The implication was clear. My children weren't spoiling me, weren't even trying to. And based on the gifts they had given Stephen for his birthday 3 months earlier, an expensive watch from Thomas Top Shelf Whiskey from Ryan and golf clubs from Amanda and Peter, it wasn't because they couldn't be generous. They simply chose not to be with me. After cake and coffee, Amanda, Peter, and the children prepared to leave. As they gathered their things, I overheard a conversation that chilled my blood. "We need to talk to Mom about selling this house," Thomas was saying quietly to Amanda in the hallway. "It's way too big for her, and property values in this neighborhood have skyrocketed." "I know," Amanda replied. Stephen mentioned the same thing. "Think of what that money could do for all of us. She could move into something smaller, maybe even live with one of us eventually, and free up all that capital." "Stephen's on board," Thomas continued. "He says she's emotionally attached to the place, but doesn't understand what it's worth now." I stepped back into the kitchen before they saw me, my hands shaking as I rinsed dishes. They were planning my future, planning to take my home, all while assuming I was incapable of managing my own affairs. Later, as the evening wound down, Ryan finally called again. He was clearly intoxicated, his words slurring as he wished me a belated happy birthday. "Sorry I missed it, Mom," he mumbled. "Work's been crazy." "Are you okay, Ryan?" I asked, concerned by his condition. "Fine, fine. Hey, is Thomas still there? Or Stephen? I needed to ask them something." "They're in the other room," I said. "What did you need to ask them?" Ryan sighed heavily. "Just money stuff. You wouldn't understand. No offense, Mom, but you've never been good with finances." "I see," I said quietly. "Ryan, are you in some kind of trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle," he insisted, then added more softly, thinking, "Perhaps I couldn't hear. Just another burden to deal with." After everyone had left and Stephen had retired to watch television, I called my friend Diane. We had been friends since college, long before I met James. She was the only person besides Harold who knew about my financial situation. "They treated my birthday like an obligation, Diane," I confided, sitting in my garden where Stephen couldn't overhear. "And I overheard them planning to convince me to sell my home." "Carrie," Diane said firmly, "this has gone on long enough. Tell them the truth. Show them you're not the financially helpless woman they think you are." "But that's just it," I replied, tears finally breaking free. "If I tell them now, I'll never know if they care about me or just what I can give them. And based on today, I'm afraid I already know the answer." "Maybe they need a wake-up call," Diane suggested. "James wouldn't recognize the children they've become." After hanging up, I sat alone among James's roses, holding the small memory box I kept hidden in the garden bench. Inside were treasures from when my children were young. Handmade Mother's Day cards, a painted rock from Thomas that said "World's Best Mom." A pressed flower. Amanda had given me a story Ryan had written about a brave mother who saved her family from dragons. I compared these mementos to the thoughtless gifts and dismissive treatment I had received today. Somewhere along the way, my children had lost sight of what truly mattered. Perhaps Stephen's influence had accelerated the change, but the seeds had been there before. I took out the last family photo taken before James died. We were all smiling, genuinely happy together at Thomas's 32nd birthday. James's arm was around me, his expression proud as he looked at our children. I traced his face with my finger, missing him, with an ache that never truly faded. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, James," I whispered to the photograph. "But I think I need to see this through. I need to know who our children really are." I decided to give them one more chance to show me they cared about me, not just what I could give them. One more opportunity to demonstrate the values James and I had tried so hard to instill. After that, I would decide whether to reveal the truth about my finances. As I returned to the house, I didn't realize how quickly and dramatically that test would come, or how painfully revelatory it would be. 6 months after my disappointing birthday celebration, I noticed a significant shift in the family's dynamics. Stephen had become increasingly secretive, taking phone calls in private and having hushed conversations with my children when they thought I wasn't listening. There was an air of excitement and conspiracy that excluded me entirely. One evening in early October, Stephen announced that he wanted to host a special family dinner. "I have an opportunity I want to discuss with everyone," he said, looking pleased with himself. "Something that could benefit the whole family." I offered to cook as I usually did for family gatherings, but Stephen insisted on catering. "This is a business dinner, Carrie. We need to make the right impression." The night of the dinner arrived, and our dining room was transformed with expensive flowers, fine china I'd never seen before, and wine that Stephen made a show of explaining was very exclusive. Thomas arrived first, followed by Amanda and Peter, and surprisingly, Ryan had flown in from Las Vegas specifically for this meeting. The children greeted Stephen with the deference usually reserved for a revered business leader. After appetizers and drinks, Stephen stood at the head of the table and cleared his throat. I've gathered everyone here because I've discovered an investment opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime, he announced. I've been developing connections with some very influential people in the real estate development world. He proceeded to outline a complex investment scheme involving a commercial property development in an up-and-coming area outside the city. According to Stephen, this development was practically guaranteed to triple investors' money within 18 months. The minimum buy-in is significant, Stephen explained, but I've spoken with the developers and they're willing to create a special family investment package for us. Thomas leaned forward eagerly. What kind of returns are we talking about? Conservatively 300%, Stephen replied. Potentially much more. I listened with growing concern as Stephen described how exclusive this opportunity was, how his connections had given him special access, and how important it was to act quickly before others discovered the opportunity. Every warning sign of an investment scam was present, promised unusually high returns, claims of exclusivity pressure to act quickly, complex explanation that discouraged questions. I had learned about these warning signs years ago from James, who had always emphasized due diligence before investing. Has anyone verified these projections? I asked. Seen the property? Researched the developers? The room fell silent, and 5 pairs of eyes turned to me with expressions ranging from surprise to irritation. Mom, Thomas said with exaggerated patience, Stephen has done extensive research. This is his area of expertise. I'd still like to know more details, I persisted. What's the track record of these developers? What comparable projects have they completed successfully? Stephen laughed dismissively. Carrie, this is precisely why I handle our finances. These technical details would just confuse you. I'm not confused, I replied. I'm asking basic due diligence questions. Amanda sighed loudly. Mom, can you just trust Stephen on this? He knows what he's doing. The conversation moved on as if I hadn't spoken with Stephen explaining how each of my children could participate in this amazing opportunity. Thomas would need to liquidate his small tech company and take out a loan to meet the minimum investment threshold. Amanda and Peter would remortgage their home. Ryan, most alarmingly, would borrow money from unnamed associates in Las Vegas. As I listened to my children eagerly planning to risk everything on this suspicious investment, I felt a deep sense of dread. They were adults making their own decisions, but they were doing so based on what appeared to be seriously flawed information and dangerous assumptions. I really think you should all consult with independent financial advisors before committing to this, I suggested when there was a pause in the conversation. Ryan rolled his eyes. No offense, Mom, but what would you know about investments? More than you might think, I replied quietly, but no one was listening. The opportunity won't wait for endless consultations, Stephen countered. My contacts need commitments by the end of the month. We're in, Thomas declared, looking at Stephen rather than me. I've been waiting for something like this. Us too, Amanda added, while Peter nodded, though he looked slightly less convinced than his wife. Count me in, Ryan confirmed. This is exactly what I need right now. Stephen beamed at them all, deliberately excluding me from his triumphant gaze. I knew I could count on you to recognize a golden opportunity, unlike some people who can only see problems and obstacles. He directed this last comment at me with a thin smile. After dinner, the conversation continued in the living room, with specific plans being made for how each of my children would raise their investment funds. I sat quietly observing the excitement and recklessness, wondering how these could possibly be the careful, thoughtful children James and I had raised. As the evening was winding down, Stephen made a suggestion that stunned me. You know, Carrie, he said as if proposing a perfectly reasonable idea. This house is really much too large for just the two of us. Have you considered that selling it could free up capital? Perhaps you could contribute to the family investment too." Before I could respond, Thomas eagerly jumped in. "That's a great point, Stephen. Mom doesn't need all this space, and the neighborhood has appreciated significantly." "We could help you find a nice retirement community," Amanda suggested, as if I were in my 80s rather than my 50s. "Something more manageable." "With social activities," Ryan added, "so you wouldn't be lonely." They continued discussing my future living arrangements as if I weren't sitting right there, as if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person with agency and feelings. "I have no intention of selling my home," I finally stated firmly, "and I strongly advise all of you to reconsider this investment. It has all the hallmarks of a scam." The room fell silent again before Stephen laughed a sound without humor. "And this, everyone, is why your mother needs guidance with financial decisions. She sees scams where there are opportunities, problems where there are solutions." "Mom," Thomas said with a patronizing smile, "I know you mean well, but this is beyond your understanding. We're not asking you to contribute if you don't want to, but please don't rain on our parade with unfounded suspicions." "They're not unfounded," I insisted. "Has anyone researched the developers? Verified property values in the area? Confirmed zoning approvals? These are basic steps before any significant investment." "Stephen has handled all that," Amanda said dismissively. "Right, Stephen." "Of course," he replied smoothly, though I noticed he provided no specific details. "I wouldn't bring this to the family otherwise." As my children prepared to leave, each hugged me perfunctorily while exchanging meaningful glances with Stephen. It was clear that in their minds, I had been categorized as difficult and obstructive someone to be managed rather than respected. After they had gone, Stephen turned to me with cold anger in his eyes. "You nearly ruined everything tonight with your questions. If you can't be supportive, at least stay quiet." "I won't stay quiet while you lead my children into what looks like financial disaster," I replied. "What aren't you telling them about this investment, Stephen?" He waved away my question. "Your paranoia is exactly why I've had to take charge. James may have indulged your little opinions about money matters, but I won't." As Stephen stormed off to his study, I sat alone in the living room thinking about what had just transpired. My children had dismissed my concerns without consideration, ready to make potentially disastrous financial decisions based solely on Stephen's word. They viewed me as financially ignorant and burdensome someone to be placed in a retirement community and forgotten. That night I called Harold my true financial advisor. "I need documentation," I told him. "I need to be prepared for what's coming." "Are you finally going to tell them the truth?" Harold asked. "Not yet," I replied. "First, I need to see how this plays out, but I want to be ready when the moment comes." As I hung up, I felt a profound sadness mixed with determination. My children had made their choices that reflected values James and I had never taught them. Now I needed to make mine guided by the principles I still believed in: honesty, integrity, and responsibility for one's actions. The next morning, I began methodically documenting everything: Stephen's investment claims, my children's responses, and my own research into the development company, which revealed several lawsuits and a history of projects that never materialized. I couldn't stop my children from making their own mistakes, but I could ensure that when reality inevitably struck, I would be prepared to respond with clarity and purpose. 3 months passed, during which my children became increasingly invested, both financially and emotionally, in Stephen's scheme. They rarely called except to share excited updates about the investment's progress, always relayed through Stephen, rather than from direct information sources. Thomas had indeed liquidated his small tech company, laying off his few employees, and taking out substantial loans using his future returns as justification. Amanda and Peter had remortgaged their home and were already planning how they would spend their anticipated profits. Ryan remained vague about his funding sources, but his nervous demeanor when money was mentioned suggested troubling arrangements. Throughout this period, Stephen became more dismissive of me at home, often speaking to me as if I were a child. "Don't worry your pretty head about these complicated matters," he would say when I asked questions. The disrespect was palpable, but I maintained my composure and continued my documentation. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was in the garden when Thomas called, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, is Stephen there? I need to talk to him immediately." "He left early this morning," I replied. "Said he had important meetings. Is everything okay?" Thomas made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "No, nothing is okay. The development deal, it's collapsed. Completely. The company has filed for bankruptcy claiming unforeseen market conditions. They're saying investors will recover less than 10 cents on the dollar." My heart sank for my son, despite having anticipated this outcome. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. Have you spoken with your sisters? Amanda's hysterical. They'll lose their house. And Ryan—" His voice trailed off. "Mom, no one can reach Stephen. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Do you know where his meetings are today?" A cold realization washed over me. "No, he didn't say. Let me check our bedroom, see if he left any information." I already suspected what I would find. Stephen's closet was half empty, his expensive suits gone. The safe in his office, which I had never been allowed to access, stood open and empty. The most valuable items he had brought into our marriage or purchased recently were missing. "Thomas," I said when I returned to the phone, "I think you should come over. Bring Amanda and Peter if you can. We need to talk." Within 2 hours, my living room had become crisis central. Thomas paced frantically, occasionally punching numbers into his phone. Amanda sat on the couch, eyes red from crying, while Peter stared blankly at the wall. Ryan had called to say he was catching the next flight home, but sounded terrified about something beyond the failed investment. "I've tried every number I have for Stephen," Thomas reported. "Nothing. His assistant at his office says she hasn't heard from him either. He took things from the house," I told them. "Clothes, valuables. The safe is empty." "Are you saying he knew this was going to happen?" Peter asked, speaking up for the first time. Before I could answer, Amanda rounded on me. "This is partly your fault, Mom. You were so negative about the investment. If you had supported Stephen, maybe he would have fought harder to save it." "Amanda," I replied calmly, "the investment wasn't real. There was no actual development. It was a scam from the beginning, and Stephen knew that." "That's ridiculous," Thomas interjected. "Stephen showed us documentation plans, projections. I saw them myself." "Fabricated," I said. "I researched the development company weeks ago. They've done this before under different names. They create elaborate materials, collect investments, then declare bankruptcy and disappear." My children stared at me in disbelief. The idea that Stephen had deliberately deceived them, that they had been thoroughly conned, was apparently harder to accept than the notion that I was somehow to blame. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Thomas demanded. "Would you have believed me?" I asked simply. "When I raised basic questions about the investment, you all dismissed me as financially ignorant. You made it very clear that Stephen's word carried weight, and mine did not." The room fell silent as my words sank in. Then Amanda began to sob again. "We're going to lose everything. The house, the children's college funds, everything." Ryan arrived later that afternoon looking physically ill. After conferring privately with Thomas, he addressed me directly. "Mom, I need to tell you something. The money I invested, I borrowed it from some very dangerous people in Vegas. People who don't accept excuses about failed investments." The fear in Ryan's eyes made my heart constrict. "How much time do you have?" "They gave me 3 days to pay it back starting yesterday." The situation was worse than I had imagined. Thomas had lost his company and was deeply in debt. Amanda and Peter faced foreclosure with 2 young children to consider, and Ryan was potentially in physical danger from loan sharks. As the reality of their situation sank in, my children's shock turned to anger, directed not at Stephen, the architect of their financial ruin, but at me. "You knew the investment was suspicious, but you didn't stop us," Thomas accused. "You could have tried harder to warn us." "I did try to warn you," I reminded him. "You told me it was beyond my understanding." "You should have insisted," Amanda cried. "You're our mother." "You're adults," I replied. "I raised you to think critically and make your own decisions. I can't force you to listen when you've decided I have nothing valuable to say." The conversation devolved from there, with blame being thrown in every direction except toward Stephen, who remained conspicuously absent. As evening approached, practical concerns took precedence. "We need to call the police about Stephen," Peter suggested. "And tell them what?" Thomas countered. "That we willingly gave money to an investment that turned out to be a scam. That's not a crime. It's just us being stupid." "We could file for bankruptcy," Amanda said quietly. "All of us. It would destroy our credit, but maybe we could start over." "Bankruptcy won't help me with the people I owe," Ryan said, his voice hollow. "They don't exactly take IOUs." As they debated options, none of which offered real solutions, I watched my children grappling with consequences they had never anticipated. Part of me wanted to reveal the truth immediately, to tell them about the $45 million and resolve their financial problems instantly. But another part held back, wondering if doing so would prevent an essential lesson from being learned. "Mom," Thomas finally said, turning to me with desperation in his eyes, "what are we going to do? We need help." For the first time in months, my son was looking at me as a source of wisdom rather than a burden to be managed. But his next words revealed the limitations of this newfound respect. "You still own this house free and clear, right? If you sold it, maybe you could help us out of this mess. You could live with one of us. We'd make room somehow." And there it was. Not a recognition of my value as a person, a mother, an individual with my own life to live, but as a potential financial resource to be tapped in an emergency. "I need some time to think," I said, standing up. "You're all welcome to stay here tonight. We'll talk more in the morning." In my garden sanctuary, surrounded by James's roses, I made my decision. My children needed to understand the consequences of their choices, but they also needed to know the truth about their father's legacy, about my financial situation, and about the values that money couldn't buy. I called Harold and asked him to prepare documentation for a family meeting the next day. Then I called Diane. "I'm going to tell them everything," I said, "at the bankruptcy hearing next week." "Are you sure that's the right time?" Diane asked. "Yes," I replied with certainty. "They need to experience the reality of where their choices and attitudes have led them. Only then will the truth have meaning." "And after?" Diane pressed. "What happens after the revelation?" "That," I said softly, "will depend on them." The bankruptcy court was housed in an imposing limestone building in downtown Minneapolis. 1 week had passed since my children had discovered Stephen's betrayal and their financial ruin, and now we were gathered for the joint bankruptcy hearing they had arranged. I had maintained my composure throughout that difficult week, offering my home as temporary shelter, while remaining non-committal about selling it to solve their financial problems. The children had alternated between desperate planning recriminations against each other and thinly veiled resentment toward me for not immediately sacrificing my home to rescue them. Ryan's situation had become particularly dire. His associates from Las Vegas had called repeatedly with escalating threats. I had overheard him in the garden, voice shaking, promising payment soon. When he ended that call, I saw something I hadn't witnessed since he was a child. My son crying in genuine fear. The morning of the hearing, I dressed differently than my children expected. Instead of my usual casual clothing, I wore a tailored navy suit that had remained unworn in my closet for years. I arranged my hair carefully, applied subtle makeup, and selected modest but elegant jewelry. When I descended the stairs, Thomas did a double take. "Mom, why are you dressed like that for bankruptcy court?" "It's still a court," I replied simply. "Appearance matters." Amanda looked me over critically. "Is that suit new?" "It looks expensive." "I've had it for years," I answered truthfully. "I just haven't had occasion to wear it." We traveled to the courthouse separately, the children together in Thomas's car while I drove myself. I explained that I had an errand to run first, which was true. I met briefly with Harold and my attorney, Linda Sawyer, in the courthouse lobby to review our strategy. The bankruptcy courtroom was clinical and intimidating, designed to process financial failure with efficiency rather than compassion. My children sat together in the front row while I took a seat several rows behind them. They didn't notice that Harold and Linda had entered and sat nearby. Judge Eleanor Winters called the unusual joint case forward. "I understand we have 3 related bankruptcy filings being presented together due to common circumstances," she noted, reviewing the paperwork. "Thomas Cunningham, Amanda, and Peter Barnes, and Ryan Cunningham." The court-appointed bankruptcy trustee outlined the basic facts: 3 related individuals, all victims of the same failed investment scheme, all now facing insolvency. Thomas owed over $750,000 to various creditors. Amanda and Peter were underwater on their mortgage by nearly $500,000 due to a second mortgage and home equity line. Ryan owed $350,000 to private lenders he refused to name. Judge Winters asked pointed questions about the investment that had caused their financial collapse. Thomas explained about the commercial development opportunity presented by their stepfather, Stephen Miller, now missing. "And you performed due diligence before investing such substantial sums?" the judge asked. "We believed we had sufficient information," Thomas replied evasively. "The investment was recommended by someone we trusted." Judge Winters frowned slightly. "I see. And what family support systems do you have available? Parents who might be able to assist during this transition?" Amanda spoke up, her voice bitter. "Our father is deceased. Our mother—" She gestured vaguely toward the back of the courtroom without actually looking at me. "Is not in a position to help financially. She owns a house free and clear," Thomas added, "but has been unwilling to sell it to assist us." "I understand your mother is present," Judge Winters noted. "Would she like to address the court regarding this matter?" Before I could respond, Ryan interjected. "With all due respect, Your Honor, our mother doesn't understand financial matters very well. That's partly why we're in this situation. If she had been more financially literate, she might have prevented our stepfather from deceiving us." A murmur ran through the courtroom at this blatant attempt to shift blame. Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Cunningham, are you suggesting your mother is responsible for your decision to invest money you didn't have in a venture you didn't properly investigate?" Ryan had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, Your Honor, I just meant that our family doesn't have resources available to help us through this situation." "I see," said Judge Winters. "Mrs. Miller, would you like to address the court?" I stood straightening my shoulders. "Actually, Your Honor, my name is Carrie Cunningham. I never legally changed my name after marrying Stephen Miller. And yes, I would like to address the court with your permission." The judge nodded, and I moved forward to the testimony area. My children watched with confusion, clearly wondering why I had corrected the judge about my name, a detail that had never seemed important before. "Your Honor," I began. "Before I make my statement, my attorney would like to submit some documentation relevant to these proceedings." "Your attorney," Thomas whispered loudly, turning to look behind him where Linda was now approaching with a folder of documents. Linda introduced herself and presented the materials to the judge and court trustee. "These documents establish my client's financial position, which is directly relevant to these bankruptcy proceedings, as her children have cited potential family support. Judge Winters reviewed the documents, her expression changing from professional neutrality to surprise. She looked up at me with new interest. "Mrs. Cunningham, would you please explain to the court the nature of your financial situation?" I took a deep breath, looking directly at my children for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Your Honor, my late husband, James Cunningham, left me an estate valued at approximately $45 million upon his death 5 years ago. These funds are held in various accounts and investments under my sole control, separate from any joint holdings with Stephen Miller, from whom I am now seeking an annulment." The courtroom fell absolutely silent. My children's expressions transformed from confusion to shock to disbelief in rapid succession. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice steady, "I have documentation proving that I attempted to warn my children about the fraudulent nature of the investment scheme proposed by Stephen Miller. I researched the development company and found multiple previous instances of similar fraud under different corporate names. I shared these concerns but was dismissed as financially naive and ignorant." I gestured to another section in the submitted documents. "I have included transcripts of conversations where my children explicitly dismissed my warnings based on the assumption that as a woman and their mother, I couldn't possibly understand financial matters." Judge Winters reviewed the materials carefully before addressing me again. "Mrs. Cunningham, given your substantial financial resources, do you intend to assist your children with their current financial difficulties?" This was the critical question, the one my children were now hanging on with expressions of desperate hope mixed with embarrassment. "Your Honor, I love my children deeply," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "Their father and I raised them with values of integrity, responsibility, and respect. What troubles me isn't that they made a financial mistake. We all make mistakes. What troubles me is the pattern of behavior that led to this moment." I paused, gathering my thoughts. For the past several years, particularly since their father's death, my children have increasingly treated me as a burden rather than a person worthy of respect. They have dismissed my knowledge and experience, spoken to me condescendingly, and valued me only for what I could give them: childcare, emotional support, and now potentially financial rescue. Thomas started to stand, appearing ready to object, but Amanda pulled him back down, her eyes fixed on me with a new awareness. "I kept the truth about my financial situation secret initially because I wanted to give my children time to adjust after their father's death without the complication of significant inheritance discussions," I explained. "But as time passed, I began to see that the secret was revealing something important: how they truly felt about me when they believed I had nothing material to offer." I turned directly to my children now. "Thomas, Amanda, Ryan, I am not speaking publicly about this to humiliate you, but because I believe you've lost sight of what truly matters. Your father and I didn't raise you to value people based on their financial usefulness. We didn't raise you to dismiss someone's knowledge because of their gender or age. We didn't raise you to place material success above integrity and family bonds." Ryan's head was bowed while Thomas stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Amanda was openly crying. "To answer your question directly, Your Honor," I continued, turning back to the judge, "yes, I do intend to help my children, but in a way that honors their father's legacy and the values we shared. Not through unconditional financial bailouts that might reinforce harmful patterns, but through structured support that encourages responsibility, respect, and personal growth." Judge Winters nodded thoughtfully. "That seems both generous and wise, Mrs. Cunningham. Given this new information, I'll need to reconsider the bankruptcy arrangements." She addressed my children directly. "Your financial situation has clearly changed from what was initially presented to this court. We'll need to adjourn and reschedule after you've had an opportunity to consult with your mother and her legal team." As the judge called for a 30-minute recess, my children remained frozen in their seats, seemingly unable to process what had just occurred. I gathered my belongings and walked past them toward the door, pausing briefly. "I'll be in conference room B with Harold and Linda if you'd like to talk," I said quietly. "Take whatever time you need." I left the courtroom with my head high, feeling neither triumphant nor vengeful, but simply resolved. The truth was finally in the open, and what happened next would reveal whether the bonds of family could be rebuilt on a foundation of authentic love rather than financial expectation. The small conference room in the courthouse felt too formal for the deeply personal conversation that was about to take place. I sat on one side of the table with Harold and Linda, waiting to see if my children would join us after the shocking revelation in court. 10 minutes passed before the door finally opened. Thomas entered first, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: anger, confusion, embarrassment. Amanda followed, eyes red from crying, clutching her purse like a shield. Ryan came last, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the chairs across the table. They sat wordlessly, exchanging glances with each other, as if trying to decide who should speak first. Thomas, always the one to take charge, finally broke the silence. $45 million, he said flatly. "You've had $45 million all this time, and you said nothing while we struggled." The accusation in his voice was unmistakable, but I had anticipated this reaction. "Yes, Thomas. I had $45 million that your father entrusted to me with the expectation that I would use it wisely, including deciding when and how to share it with you." "But why keep it secret?" Amanda demanded, her voice breaking. "We're your children." "Initially, I kept it secret because I wanted you all to have time to grieve your father without immediately focusing on inheritance," I explained. "But as time passed, I began to notice concerning patterns in how you were relating to me and to money." "So this was some kind of test?" Ryan asked bitterly. "A way to see if we were worthy?" "Not a test," I corrected gently. "An opportunity to see who you truly were when you thought I had nothing material to offer. An opportunity I wish you had approached differently." The room fell silent again as my words sank in. Harold cleared his throat and opened a folder containing financial documents. "Perhaps we should discuss the immediate situation," he suggested. "Mrs. Cunningham has authorized me to outline a structured assistance plan for each of you addressing your current financial crises, while establishing a framework for future support." "Structured assistance?" Thomas repeated, his tone skeptical. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means I'll help you, but with conditions," I said firmly. "Conditions that reflect the values your father and I always tried to instill." For the next hour, we outlined specific plans for each child. For Thomas, I would establish a legitimate business investment fund with proper oversight and mentorship from trusted business associates of James. For Amanda and Peter, I would pay off their home's underwater mortgage, but require them to complete financial literacy courses and work with a budget counselor. For Ryan, I would immediately settle his debts with the dangerous associates in Las Vegas, but require him to enter addiction treatment for his gambling problem, a condition that caused him to break down in tears, finally admitting the full extent of his addiction. Throughout the discussion, my children's attitudes gradually shifted. The initial anger and accusation gave way to shame, then to reluctant acceptance, and finally to something approaching genuine remorse. "I don't understand how we became these people," Amanda said quietly, after Harold had finished explaining the details of my financial assistance. "When did we start treating you like this, Mom?" "It didn't happen overnight," I replied honestly. "It was a gradual shift accelerated by Stephen's influence, but rooted in choices you were already making. You began measuring value in material terms rather than character. You began dismissing wisdom that didn't align with what you wanted to hear. You began seeing family relationships as transactional rather than unconditional. Thomas, always the most proud, struggled visibly with his emotions. I said terrible things to you, he admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. I called you cheap, financially ignorant, a burden. I can't believe you're still willing to help me after that. I'm your mother, Thomas. I love you unconditionally even when I don't love your behavior. There's a difference. Ryan, who had been quietest throughout the meeting, finally spoke directly to me. Why didn't you stop me? You must have suspected about the gambling. You could have intervened before it got so bad. Would you have listened? I asked gently. When I tried to question Stephen's investment scheme, you dismissed me completely. You were adults making your own choices, and part of respecting you as adults meant allowing you to make those choices, even when I feared they were mistakes. The conversation continued, painfully honest but increasingly productive. By the end of our 2 hours together, preliminary agreements had been drafted and signed. My children would receive the financial help they desperately needed, but with clear conditions and expectations for how they would rebuild their lives and our relationships. As the meeting concluded, Harold and Linda gathered their papers and prepared to leave. I'll need to meet with each of you individually over the next few days to finalize details, Harold explained. And Mrs. Cunningham has asked me to begin the process of locating Stephen Miller and pursuing legal action for his fraudulent activities. After the lawyers had gone, I remained alone with my children for the first time since the revelation. The professional buffer removed, the atmosphere turned more personal and raw. I can't believe Dad left you in charge of everything, Thomas said, a hint of his old attitude resurfacing. No trusts for us, no direct inheritance. Your father trusted my judgment, I replied simply. He believed I would know when and how you were ready to handle significant wealth. Based on recent events, it seems his confidence in my judgment was well placed. Thomas flinched at the gentle rebuke, but nodded slowly in acknowledgement. What happens now? Amanda asked, her voice small. With us, I mean. As a family. That depends on all of us, I said. Relationships damaged by disrespect and conditional love aren't rebuilt overnight. It will take time, effort, and genuine change, not just because there's money involved now, but because it's the right thing to do. I want to try, Ryan said with a sincerity I hadn't heard from him in years. I really want to try, Mom. As we prepared to leave the conference room, Amanda hesitated, then stepped forward to embrace me. It was the first genuine hug she had initiated in years, not the perfunctory greeting or farewell I had grown accustomed to. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my shoulder. I don't know how we lost our way so badly. I held my daughter tightly, feeling the walls I had built, to protect myself beginning to soften. The important thing is that we found our way back, I told her. That's what matters now. 1 year later, our family gathered for Thanksgiving at my home. Still my home, as I had firmly refused to sell it, despite Thomas's initial suggestions that a smaller place would be more practical for me. The house remained filled with memories of James and our family's happier times, and I had no intention of giving that up. The changes in my children over that year had been remarkable. Thomas had established a legitimate tech consulting firm with proper business planning and oversight. The structure and mentorship provided through my assistants had helped him build something sustainable rather than chasing quick success. He had begun dating Sarah, a kind and grounded woman who seemed unimpressed by material displays, a significant change from his previous girlfriends. Amanda and Peter had completed their financial literacy courses and worked diligently with their budget counselor. They had significantly scaled back their lifestyle, selling one of their cars and focusing on experiences rather than possessions for their children. Amanda had started a small event planning business from home, allowing her to earn income while spending more time with Sophie and Jackson. Ryan's journey had been the most challenging, and the most rewarding to witness. After completing a gambling addiction treatment program, he had moved back to Minneapolis and begun working for a nonprofit organization helping others with addiction issues. He attended regular support group meetings and had developed authentic friendships, not centered around money or status. Stephen had eventually been located in Mexico and extradited to face charges of investment fraud. The legal proceedings were ongoing, but he was no longer a presence in our lives. As we sat around the Thanksgiving table that year, I looked at my family with profound gratitude. The painful lessons of the previous years had transformed us all. My children now related to me as a person worthy of respect, not just a potential source of financial support. Our conversations had depth and authenticity that had been missing for too long. After dinner, I gathered everyone in the living room and unveiled a surprise: the establishment of the James Cunningham Family Foundation, dedicated to promoting financial literacy and supporting victims of investment fraud. I had dedicated $10 million of my fortune to the foundation, with the intention that my children would eventually help guide its mission. "This is how we honor your father's legacy," I explained, "by using the resources he built to help others avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed our family." The children embraced the idea with enthusiasm that felt genuine rather than performative. As we discussed possibilities for the foundation's work, I saw in each of them glimpses of the values James and I had tried to instill: compassion, integrity, responsibility, and the understanding that wealth was a tool for positive impact, not a measure of personal worth. Later that evening, as the children prepared to leave, each embraced me with genuine warmth. Thomas whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us, Mom," while Amanda promised to bring the children for a visit that weekend, just because. Ryan lingered longest, helping me clear the last dishes, comfortable in the silence we shared. When everyone had gone, I sat in my garden among James's roses, which continued to bloom beautifully under my care. I took out the memory box from the garden bench, adding new mementos alongside the childhood treasures: a business card from Thomas's legitimate company, a family photo from Amanda showing their simpler but happier life, a sobriety chip Ryan had given me to commemorate his progress. "I think we're finding our way back, James," I whispered to the stars. It wasn't the path either of us would have chosen, but perhaps it was the one they needed to take. The truth about money had nearly broken my family, but the truth about what really mattered, love, respect, integrity, was slowly helping us rebuild. The $45 million had been both a curse and a blessing, a catalyst for painful but necessary growth. In keeping it secret, I had learned painful truths about my children, but in revealing it, I had given us all the opportunity to heal and become better versions of ourselves. In the end, I realized that was exactly what James would have wanted his legacy to be: not just financial security, but the values and relationships that make life truly rich. What would you do if you discovered a loved one had been treating you differently because of assumptions about your financial situation? Would you confront them immediately, or wait for the right moment to reveal the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more real-life family journeys and lessons learned the hard way. Remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the authentic connections we build with those we love. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find wisdom in both your struggles and successes.